I thought I understood corruption. I had seen men fall to chaos, watched their bodies warp and their minds shatter. I believed transformation came suddenly, dramatically, that one day you were human and the next you were something else entirely. I was wrong. The change happened slowly, so gradually that you don't notice until the moment you realize you can no longer remember your own name. This is what I learned as my body was unmade piece by piece, as my thoughts dissolved into noise, as everything that made me human was stripped away and replaced with something that should never have existed. My name was Corvus Thane. I remember that much, though the memory feels distant now, like something that happened to someone else. I was a sergeant in the Imperial Guard, stationed on a fortress world at the edge of the Maelstrom. We held the line against raiders and cultists, routine deployments that followed predictable patterns. The enemy attacked. We repelled them. Casualties were acceptable. Reinforcements arrived. The rhythm of Imperial warfare, unchanged for millennia. The whispers started 3 months before my final transformation. I didn't recognize them as whispers at first. They felt like my own thoughts, small observations that seemed perfectly reasonable. During guard duty, staring out at the wasteland beyond our walls, a voice that sounded like my own would note the inefficiency of our defensive positions. The commissar was incompetent. The captain made decisions based on doctrine rather than tactical reality. These thoughts felt natural, justified by my years of experience. I began speaking more in strategy meetings, offering corrections to superior officers. The first time, my captain reprimanded me for insubordination. The second time, he threatened punishment. By the third time, I no longer cared about his threats. The whispers had convinced me that I understood warfare better than men who had never questioned the Tactica Imperialis, who followed orders without considering whether those orders made sense. My squad noticed the change before I did. Trooper Kellen asked if I was sleeping properly. I told him I slept better than ever, which was true. The nightmares that plague most guardsmen had stopped. Instead, I dreamed of patterns, geometric shapes that folded into dimensions my waking mind couldn't process. I would wake feeling refreshed, energized, certain that I had glimpsed some greater truth during the night. The fortress chaplain summoned me after I was reported for heretical statements. I had told several troopers that the Emperor was a fool for believing humanity could be unified under a single vision, that diversity of thought was strength rather than weakness. I don't remember saying these things, but 6 witnesses confirmed it. The chaplain questioned me for 3 hours, searching for signs of corruption. He found nothing conclusive, but ordered me to increase my prayer recitations and report daily to the chapel for spiritual counseling. I attended one session. The chaplain droned about faith and purity while I sat and smiled, thinking about how limited his understanding was. He spoke of the Emperor's protection as if it were a tangible force, as if prayers could actually shield flesh from bullets or blades. I wanted to explain to him that power came from understanding the true nature of reality, not from chanting the same phrases for 10,000 years. I kept silent, nodded at the appropriate moments, and never returned. The whispers grew louder. They came during the day now, not just in dreams. During combat drills, a voice would suggest different tactics, better formations, more efficient killing methods. I began implementing these suggestions without authorization, repositioning my squad in ways that violated standing orders. Our kill ratios improved dramatically. The captain noticed but said nothing, perhaps recognizing that my unorthodox methods were keeping more guardsmen alive. My body began changing in subtle ways during this period, though I didn't connect the physical alterations to the whispers. My left hand developed a tremor that came and went without pattern. Sometimes my fingers would spasm, curling into shapes that felt wrong, unnatural. I ignored it, assuming stress or poor nutrition. Fortress rations were never sufficient, and we supplemented with whatever we could scavenge. Sleep became optional. I would lie in my bunk for hours, not tired, but not fully alert either, existing in a state between waking and dreaming. During these periods, the whispers would intensify, becoming almost conversational. They would ask questions. What did I desire? Power, certainly. Knowledge, absolutely. Freedom from the suffocating doctrine that governed every aspect of Imperial life. The whispers seemed pleased with these answers. Other guardsmen began avoiding me. I would enter the mess hall and conversations would stop. Troopers who had served with me for years suddenly had urgent business elsewhere when I approached. Kellen, who had been my closest friend in the regiment, requested transfer to another squad. The request was granted immediately. I felt nothing about this, no sadness or anger, just a distant curiosity about why they would fear me when I had done nothing to harm them. The captain finally confronted me in my quarters. He arrived with 2 armed troopers, a precaution that seemed excessive until I realized he genuinely feared what I might do. He told me I was being reassigned to perimeter patrol, the furthest point from the main fortress, where I would have minimal contact with other guardsmen. It was a clear demotion, a punishment for behavior that violated no specific regulation, but nevertheless disturbed everyone who witnessed it. I accepted the reassignment without protest. The perimeter suited me better than the fortress interior. Fewer people, fewer questions. More time to think and listen to the whispers that now felt more real than the voices of my fellow humans. I took my post the next morning, a solitary watch station overlooking a dead valley where nothing grew and nothing moved. The isolation accelerated my transformation. Without the constant presence of other humans, I had no baseline for normal behavior, no mirror to show me what I was becoming. The whispers stopped being whispers and became instructions, clear and direct. They told me where to look in the valley below, pointing out features in the landscape that I had never noticed before. Patterns in the rock formations, arrangements of stone that couldn't be natural. 3 weeks into my perimeter posting, I found the shrine. The whispers had been guiding me toward it for days, suggesting I explored during my off-duty hours rather than returning to the fortress. The shrine sat in a depression between 2 ridges, completely invisible from the watch station, but easy to find once you knew where to look. Someone had carved symbols into the rock face, ancient marks that predated Imperial occupation of this world. I should have reported it immediately. Any sign of heretical activity, any evidence of chaos worship, required immediate notification to command. Instead, I examined the symbols carefully, running my fingers over the carved lines. They felt warm despite the cold desert air, and as I touched them, I felt something touch me back. Not physically, but in my mind. A presence that had been waiting for someone to complete the connection. The presence introduced itself, though not with a name I could pronounce or remember. It showed me visions of what I could become, possibilities that existed outside the narrow confines of Imperial life. I could have power, true power, not the limited authority of rank and regulation. I could understand the fundamental forces that governed reality, see beyond the lies the Imperium told about the nature of chaos. All I had to do was continue listening, continue following the instructions that would be given. I returned to the shrine every night after that. The presence taught me things, small exercises that would open my mind to greater truths. meditation techniques that imperial doctrine would call sorcery, ways of perceiving the world that revealed hidden layers of reality. Each lesson left me changed in small ways, my thoughts becoming more fluid, my perceptions expanding beyond normal human senses. My body began changing more noticeably. The tremor in my left hand became constant, and the skin there developed a waxy texture, slightly translucent. I could see the bones beneath, not clearly, but as shadows moving under the surface. My right eye started seeing colors that shouldn't exist, shades that had no names, and appeared in the spaces between objects rather than on their surfaces. I found this fascinating rather than disturbing. The watch station log showed I was maintaining regular patrols and filing required reports. I have no memory of doing these things. Some part of me must have continued performing basic duties, while the rest of my consciousness explored the lessons the presence was teaching. This fragmenting of awareness felt natural, even desirable. Why should one consciousness be limited to one task when it could divide itself and accomplish multiple things simultaneously? Other changes accelerated, my sense of taste inverted, sweet things becoming bitter, and bitter things becoming sweet. Food lost its appeal entirely. I would go days without eating, feeling no hunger, drawing sustenance from something other than physical nourishment. My body weight should have dropped, but instead I seemed to be gaining mass, my uniform becoming tight across the shoulders and chest despite the lack of food. The presence began asking for more active participation. It wanted me to perform rituals, small ceremonies that would strengthen the connection between us. I carved additional symbols around the shrine, copying patterns the presence showed me in visions. Each new mark made the shrine more powerful, created a resonance I could feel even from the watch station kilometers away. The resonance called to me constantly, a pull that made it harder to focus on anything else. I stopped sleeping entirely. My body no longer required rest, and the distinction between waking and dreaming had become meaningless anyway. I would stand at my post for 18-hour shifts without fatigue, my attention simultaneously on the valley below and on the lessons unfolding in my mind. The presence was preparing me for something, teaching me the foundations I would need for a greater transformation. My reflection in the watch station's window showed someone I barely recognized. My face had become asymmetrical, the left side slightly higher than the right, the jaw misaligned. My eyes no longer tracked together, each moving independently to focus on different things. My skin had developed a subtle iridescence, catching light in ways that human skin shouldn't. I found these changes beautiful rather than horrifying, evidence that I was becoming something more than the limited creature I had been. The captain visited my post unannounced, bringing with him a commissar I didn't recognize. They questioned me about my behavior, my appearance, my apparent lack of eating or sleeping. I answered their questions calmly, rationally, explaining that I was simply more efficient now, that I had learned to push past the limitations other humans accepted as inevitable. The commissar drew his bolt pistol. The captain stopped him, arguing that I had broken no specific regulation. That unusual behavior alone wasn't grounds for execution. They left me at my post, but confiscated my long-range Vox equipment, cutting off my ability to communicate with other sections of the perimeter. This suited me perfectly. I had no desire to communicate with anyone, except the presence, which required no technology to reach me. That night, I performed my first true ritual at the shrine, speaking words the presence had taught me, words in a language I didn't know, but somehow understood. The air around the shrine shimmered and twisted, and I felt something fundamental shift in the fabric of reality. The ritual opened a door, though not a physical one. Through it, I could perceive other realms, dimensions that existed alongside our reality, but remained invisible to normal human senses. I saw impossible geometries, spaces that folded into themselves and emerged somewhere else entirely. I saw beings of pure thought and energy, entities that had never been bound to flesh and never would be. I saw the warp in its true form, not the hellscape imperial doctrine described, but a realm of infinite possibility where thought and reality were the same thing. The presence made its offer explicit. I could remain human, limited and temporary, bound by flesh that would decay and die within a few more decades. Or I could transcend humanity entirely, become something that existed beyond the constraints of biology and time. The transformation would be painful, yes, but pain was temporary, and the reward was eternal. I would have power to reshape reality according to my will, to command forces that could unmake worlds. I accepted without hesitation. The old Corvus Thane, the sergeant who had followed orders and maintained discipline, was already gone. What remained wanted only to experience what lay beyond the narrow boundaries of human existence. The presence seemed pleased. It gave me new instructions, told me to prepare myself for the first stage of transformation. I would need to gather certain materials, perform specific rituals, invite the warp to touch me directly, rather than through the filtered connection we had maintained. Gathering materials proved simple. The fortress had a mortuary, where the bodies of fallen guardsmen were prepared for burial or cremation. I volunteered for night duty in that section, claiming I wanted to honor the dead with proper care. The Medici staff accepted this eagerly, grateful to have someone willing to work the unpopular shift. Alone with the corpses, I harvested what the presence required. Bone fragments, organs that had ceased functioning, blood from those who had died within the last few hours. I brought these materials to the shrine and arranged them according to the patterns shown in my visions. The presence guided me, correcting my positioning when I made errors, teaching me the proper ways to channel warp energy through physical objects. The arrangement took 3 nights to complete. When finished, it formed a circle roughly 3 meters across, the components placed with mathematical precision. On the 4th night, I entered the circle and began the ritual that would initiate my transformation. I spoke the words the presence had taught me, syllables that felt wrong in my mouth, that my human vocal cords weren't designed to produce. I cut my own flesh with a blade, letting blood fall on specific points within the circle. I opened my mind completely to the presence, removing all barriers, all resistance, inviting it to flood into my consciousness without restraint. The pain was immediate and absolute. Not physical pain, though my body certainly suffered, but something deeper. The pain of having your identity torn apart and reassembled incorrectly. The pain of perceiving things your brain has no framework to process. The pain of feeling your humanity slide away like water through open fingers, while something else rushes in to fill the void. I screamed, but the sound that emerged wasn't human. My vocal cords had already begun changing, lengthening and thickening, developing resonances that no human throat should produce. The scream became a roar, then something beyond classification, a sound that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Anyone within hearing distance should have investigated. But the ritual had created a bubble of isolation, a space where normal cause and effect no longer applied. My left arm began the physical transformation first. The tremor that had persisted for weeks intensified into violent spasms, the muscles contracting with such force that I heard bones crack. But the bones didn't break. They reshaped themselves, growing longer, developing additional joints where joints shouldn't exist. The skin split along the length of my arm, but no blood emerged. Instead, something else leaked out, a substance that wasn't quite flesh and wasn't quite liquid, that seemed to exist in a state between matter and energy. The transformation spread from my arm to my shoulder, my chest, my neck. Each area went through the same process: violent spasms, restructuring, emergence of something new. I remained conscious throughout, unable to lose myself to unconsciousness, no matter how intense the pain became. The presence wanted me aware, wanted me to experience every moment of the change, to understand what I was becoming. My face began to melt. That's the only way to describe it. The bone structure beneath my skin softened and flowed like wax, my features sliding into new configurations. My jaw extended, my skull elongated, my eye sockets widened to accommodate organs that were no longer quite eyes. My teeth fell out, and new ones grew in their place, sharper and more numerous, arranged in patterns that served no purpose related to eating. Hours passed, though I had no reliable way to measure time. The sun should have risen, but the ritual kept the area in perpetual darkness, or perhaps my new eyes simply couldn't perceive daylight the way human eyes did. When the initial transformation finally subsided, I remained in the circle, examining what I had become, with senses that now extended far beyond sight and touch. I had grown. My body was now nearly 2.5 meters tall, massively muscled, but with proportions that violated human anatomy. My arms were too long, my legs bent backward at the knee. My torso had developed additional organs I could feel but couldn't identify. My skin had become something like leather, thick and tough, colored in shades that shifted depending on the angle of observation. But I was still recognizably humanoid, still had 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, still retained enough of my original form that someone who had known me might recognize what I had been. This disappointed me. I had expected something more dramatic, more complete. The presence sensed my disappointment and responded with what felt like amusement. This was only the beginning, it told me. The first stage. I would continue transforming, continue changing, until nothing of the original Corvus Thane remained. I left the shrine and began walking, not back toward the fortress but out into the wasteland. Some instinct told me the fortress was no longer safe, that I had crossed a threshold that would make me immediately identifiable as corrupted. The Imperial Guard would execute me on sight. Better to avoid them entirely, to find others who had undergone similar transformations, who would accept what I was becoming. My new body moved differently than my old one. The additional joints in my legs allowed for a strange, loping gait that covered ground quickly but felt unnatural, wrong. I had to consciously think about each step. Couldn't rely on muscle memory because the muscles now existed in different configurations. Walking required constant attention, but that attention came easily. My mind had also changed, become faster and more fragmented, capable of focusing on multiple things without any single focus diminishing. I encountered my first prey after walking for approximately 6 hours. A civilian transport had broken down in the wasteland, 3 crew members attempting repairs. They saw me approaching and reached for weapons, but I was faster. My body moved before I consciously decided to attack, driven by instincts that had nothing to do with hunger or territoriality. I killed them all within seconds, my new claws tearing through their bodies with efficiency that should have disturbed me, but instead felt satisfying, correct. I didn't eat them. The transformation had eliminated any need for conventional food. But I studied the bodies, examined the wounds I had inflicted, marveled at how easily flesh parted when subjected to sufficient force. The presence whispered approval, told me I was learning to use my new form properly. More opportunities would come. I would encounter many more humans, and each killing would teach me something about my capabilities. The fortress noticed my absence within the first day. I intercepted their Vox communications, my enhanced hearing picking up transmissions that my old ears could never have detected. They were searching for me, had found the shrine and the ritual circle, had declared me officially corrupted, and ordered my immediate termination. A full platoon was being deployed to hunt me, led by the same commissar who had almost executed me at my watch station. I should have fled. A rational human facing an entire platoon would retreat, hide, try to escape to safer territory. Instead, I felt excitement. The presence encouraged this, whispered that I should test myself, prove my superiority over the limited creatures I had once been. I circled around and began tracking the platoon, using terrain and my new sensory capabilities to remain undetected while I studied their tactics and identified weaknesses. They moved in standard formation, by-the-book tactics that any enemy familiar with Imperial doctrine could predict. I waited until they were crossing a narrow ravine, then attacked from above. I killed 7 guardsmen in the first 30 seconds, moving through their formation faster than they could react. The survivors scattered and tried to establish defensive positions, but their training worked against them. They did what they were supposed to do, what the Tactica Imperialis prescribed, which made them predictable. The commissar showed more courage than sense. He charged me directly, bolt pistol firing, each shot aimed with precision at what he assumed were vital areas. The bolts hit me. I felt the impact, felt the explosive rounds detonating inside my body. But the damage was superficial, already healing before he could fire another shot. I caught him by the throat, lifted him off the ground, studied his face as his features shifted from courage to terror to acceptance. I spoke to him, or tried to. What emerged was no longer human speech, but he seemed to understand anyway. I told him I had found freedom, had escaped the prison of Imperial doctrine. I told him he was dying for a lie, that the Emperor he served had never cared about individual guardsmen, would never mourn his death. He tried to say the litany of protection. I crushed his throat before he could finish the first verse. The remaining guardsmen retreated. I didn't pursue them. Killing them all would serve no purpose, and the presence suggested I should allow survivors to report back to the fortress. Let them tell others what I had become. Let fear spread through the garrison. Fear was a weapon more effective than any physical violence. My body continued changing after the battle. The wounds from the commissar's bolt pistol healed incorrectly, the flesh knitting together in patterns that left raised ridges across my torso. But these ridges had purpose. They formed channels that seemed to conduct energy, warp energy perhaps, creating pathways that made my body more efficient at channeling the forces the presence was teaching me to command. I returned to the wasteland and began exploring further from the fortress. The presence directed me toward specific locations, places where the warp touched reality more directly, where I could learn faster and transform more completely. I found other shrines, older and more powerful than the one I had discovered. I performed rituals at each one, speaking words that came easier now, that my changing vocal apparatus was better suited to produce. I found them 3 weeks after leaving the fortress. A community of corrupted humans, perhaps 200 individuals, living in ruins that predated Imperial settlement. They had built crude shelters from scavenged materials, established a hierarchy based on strength and the degree of their transformations. When I approached, they didn't flee or attack. They recognized what I was, accepted me immediately as one of their own. Their leader called himself the Magister, though I suspected that wasn't the name he had been born with. He had been human once, but his transformation had progressed far beyond mine. His body was asymmetrical, one arm massive and clawed, while the other remained almost human in proportion. His face had split vertically, creating two mouths that spoke in disturbing harmony. He welcomed me, asked what I sought in their community. I told him I wanted to complete my transformation, to become something beyond human limitation. He laughed, both mouths moving independently, creating sounds that overlapped and interfered with each other. He told me everyone here wanted the same thing, that we were all pursuing the same dream of transcendence, but few would achieve it. Most would become something less than they hoped, something trapped between human and demon, useful only as weapons or sacrifices. The Magister showed me the colony's shrine, a cave system that extended deep underground, where the walls themselves seemed alive with warp energy. He explained that the colony had existed for decades, drawing in corrupted individuals from across the sector, providing sanctuary for those the Imperium had declared lost. Some had been here for years, their transformations progressing slowly. Others had arrived recently and would likely die within weeks, unable to withstand the changes being forced upon their flesh. I met others whose transformations had taken different paths. A woman whose entire body had become translucent, her internal organs visible as dark shapes suspended in what looked like living glass. A man whose arms had split into multiple appendages, each ending in hands with too many fingers. A child, or what had been a child, whose head had grown to 3 times normal size, while the body remained small, creating a grotesque imbalance that should have been impossible to sustain. They taught me techniques for managing the pain. The transformation never stopped hurting, but you could learn to distance yourself from the sensation, to observe it without being consumed by it. You could fragment your consciousness, partition away the parts experiencing suffering, while other parts remained functional. I practiced this constantly, creating mental divisions that allowed me to maintain coherence despite the ongoing changes to my brain structure. The Magister conducted rituals in the deep caves, ceremonies that drew on the power of all present to amplify effects no single individual could achieve. I participated in my first group ritual 3 days after arriving. 30 of us formed a circle around a central figure, a man who had volunteered to attempt a breakthrough transformation. We chanted words in languages none of us consciously knew, building energy that made the air visible, that created distortions in space itself. The volunteer's transformation was spectacular and horrifying. His body didn't just change, it exploded outward, flesh and bone, and something else expanding in all directions simultaneously. For a moment, he existed in multiple states at once, human and demon, and something between. Then the process stabilized, and what remained was barely recognizable as having ever been human. 4 legs, 6 arms, a head that seemed to have no fixed form, shifting constantly between different configurations. The breakthrough had succeeded. The volunteer had become what we called a greater spawn, something with actual power, actual agency beyond simple violence. He could speak, though his words required translation by the Magister, could think and plan and manipulate warp energy directly. This was what we all aspired to, the transformation that would make us more than disposable creatures, that would give us purpose beyond serving as vessels for chaos. But most attempts failed, I witnessed dozens over the following weeks. Each failure was unique, but all ended in death or something worse than death. Bodies that transformed into shapes that couldn't sustain life, that collapsed into piles of twitching flesh. Minds that shattered under the strain, leaving biological shells that responded to no stimulus. Transformations that simply stopped halfway, creating frozen states that could neither progress nor reverse. My own changes continued steadily. My spine had developed additional vertebrae, allowing my torso to bend in ways that would have paralyzed a normal human. My legs had reversed, now bending backward like those of a digitigrade animal, forcing me to walk in a permanent crouch that put my head at waist level. My hands had grown additional fingers, 3 on each hand, creating 8-fingered appendages that could manipulate objects with disturbing precision. My mind fragmented further. I could now maintain 5 or 6 separate thought processes simultaneously, each operating independently, while remaining connected to a central consciousness I still recognized as fundamentally in. One partition handled physical coordination, another monitored my surroundings, a third analyzed patterns in the warp energy flowing through the caves, a fourth rehearsed rituals and techniques the Magister was teaching. A fifth did nothing but scream, a continuous expression of the pain I had partitioned away from conscious awareness. The colony began experiencing attacks. Imperial forces had located us, were probing our defenses with increasing boldness. The Magister organized our resistance, positioned the most combat-capable spawn at key defensive points. I found myself assigned to a forward position, expected to intercept any Imperial scouts who came too close to the caves. I killed my first Space Marine during one of these defensive actions. He was from the Angels of Redemption, his armor painted in the cream and black of his chapter. He fought with superhuman skill, his bolter fire precise and devastating, his close combat technique perfect. But I was faster, stronger, more willing to sacrifice my own body to achieve victory. I tore his helmet free and drove my claws into his face, watched the light fade from his enhanced eyes, felt a surge of satisfaction that my fragmented mind recognized as disturbing, but couldn't fully process as wrong. My memory began failing around this time, not all at once, but in patches, entire days disappearing as if they had never existed. I would find myself in locations with no recollection of how I had arrived there, my body bearing wounds I didn't remember receiving. The Magister told me this was normal, that human memory couldn't survive the transformation intact, that I would need to develop new ways of maintaining continuity. But it wasn't just memory. My ability to understand human language was deteriorating. Words that had been simple and clear became increasingly abstract, their meanings slippery and uncertain. I could still speak, or thought I could, but the Magister told me my vocalizations had become incomprehensible to others, that I was using sounds human vocal cords couldn't reproduce. He taught me simplified gestures for basic communication. My vision changed fundamentally. I could no longer see colors the way humans did. Everything existed in shades of energy, bright where warp power was concentrated, dim where reality remained stable. Living things glowed with internal light, the intensity varying based on their connection to chaos. Humans appeared as dull embers. The transformed spawn were bright flames. The Magister was a bonfire that hurt to look at directly. I stopped recognizing faces, not just faces, but the concept of faces as distinct features that identified individuals. People became collections of energy signatures and movement patterns. I knew the Magister by the way he walked, the rhythm of his breathing, the specific frequency of power he emanated. I knew other spawn by similar markers, but if asked to describe what anyone looked like, I would have no answer. The question itself made no sense to me anymore. My body continued growing larger, more massive. I was now nearly 3 meters tall, my weight perhaps 300 kilograms, despite having eaten nothing for weeks. The mass came from somewhere else, from the warp itself perhaps, manifesting as physical matter that hadn't existed before. My muscles developed layers, one set moving while another remained stationary, creating motion that looked impossible from outside my skin. Coherent thought became harder. Not impossible, but requiring effort that would have been trivial before. I could still plan, still reason, but the processes felt sluggish, indirect, as if my thoughts had to travel through multiple obstacles to reach conclusions that once came instantly. The partitions in my mind began developing independence, pursuing their own goals that sometimes contradicted what I consciously wanted. The screaming partition grew louder, harder to contain. Sometimes it would break through into conscious awareness, overwhelming everything else, reducing me to a creature that could only express pain through sound. These episodes lasted minutes or hours, I couldn't tell which. When they passed, I would find myself somewhere new, surrounded by destruction I had apparently caused but didn't remember creating. I tried holding on to memories deliberately, repeating key information to preserve it. My name was Corvus Thane. I had been an Imperial Guard sergeant. I came from a world whose name I could no longer recall. These facts mattered, were important, were the foundation of who I had been. But even as I repeated them, they felt less real, less connected to whatever I was now. Corvus Thane was a story about someone else, not an identity I actually possessed. The Magister began avoiding me. When I sought him out for guidance, he would gesture for me to stay back, communicate through intermediaries rather than approaching directly. Eventually, one of the other spawn explained that I had become unstable, dangerous even to others in the colony. I had killed 3 spawn during my episodes, torn them apart without apparent reason or recognition. The Magister was considering whether I needed to be destroyed before I became a threat to the entire community. This information should have distressed me. Instead, I felt only mild curiosity about why I had killed them, what had triggered the violence. Some partition of my mind knew this emotional flatness was itself a symptom of degradation, that I was losing the capacity for complex feelings. But that partition had no way to communicate with the rest of my consciousness, no way to sound an alarm that might preserve what remained. My body began developing features that served no obvious purpose. A second spine grew parallel to the first, the two sometimes moving independently, creating ripples across my back. My ribs extended outside my skin, forming an external cage that protected nothing. My skull sprouted protrusions, bone growing in random directions, some curving back into my head, others extending outward like antlers. Each new feature caused agony that I could no longer adequately partition away. I stopped being able to recognize my own limbs. I would look down and see arms that might have been mine, or might have belonged to something else, with no way to determine ownership. Movement became trial and error, attempting to will various appendages into motion until I found ones that responded. Sometimes I had 2 arms, sometimes 6. The number seemed to vary based on factors I couldn't identify. The colony began preparing for a major ritual, something the Magister called the Ascension. He planned to attempt a transformation that would elevate multiple spawn simultaneously, creating a gestalt entity with powers far beyond what any individual could possess. I was selected as one of the participants, though the Magister made clear this was likely to kill me. My instability made me unsuitable for careful, controlled transformation. Better to use me as raw material for something greater. They gathered us in the deepest cave, 15 spawn, whose transformations had progressed beyond any hope of reversal. The chamber was massive, its walls covered in symbols that hurt to perceive, that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed directly. The Magister stood at the center, conducting preparations, arranging us in a specific pattern based on criteria I didn't understand. I barely understood what was happening. The degradation of my cognitive functions had accelerated, leaving me with only fragments of awareness. Brief moments of clarity separated by long periods where I was conscious, but not truly thinking. I remember being positioned in the pattern. I remember the Magister beginning the chant, his dual mouths speaking in perfect synchronization. I remember the other spawn joining the chant, creating harmonies that resonated in dimensions beyond normal hearing. The ritual began building energy, drawing power from the warp itself, channeling it through our transformed bodies. I felt myself becoming a conduit, something flowing through me rather than originating from me. The sensation was beyond description, beyond anything human language could capture. Pain and pleasure simultaneously, creation and destruction, expansion and compression all happening at once. My body began dissolving. The flesh that had been solid became liquid, then vapor, then something that wasn't matter at all. But I didn't disappear. I remained conscious, aware, even as the physical substrate of my existence evaporated. I existed as pure consciousness for a moment, unbound by form or limitation, experiencing existence as the warp itself experienced it. Then the pattern reasserted itself. The energy flowing through us began crystallizing, forming new structures, new configurations of matter and thought. But the formation wasn't creating individuals. We were merging, our separate consciousnesses flowing into a collective whole. I could feel the others, their thoughts and memories mixing with mine, creating something that was all of us and none of us simultaneously. The mergence failed. Something in the pattern was wrong, some imbalance that the Magister hadn't accounted for. Instead of creating a unified greater demon, the ritual spawned something uncontrolled, something that immediately began attacking its creators. I felt my consciousness fracturing further, splitting into shards that each believed themselves to be the true Corvus Thane. Reality reasserted itself violently. The energy that had dissolved us reversed, slamming our consciousnesses back into physical form. But the forms were wrong, incomplete, cobbled together from whatever matter was available. I found myself in a body that had parts from multiple spawn, appendages that hadn't been mine originally, now grafted onto a torso that barely resembled human ancestry. The thing we had created, the failed gestalt, filled the chamber. It had mass beyond physical possibility, existing partially in real space and partially in the warp, its form shifting constantly between different configurations. It had no mind, only hunger and rage, the collective trauma of 15 transformations compressed into pure destructive impulse. The Magister tried to contain it, channeling power through himself in an attempt to reimpose control on the ritual. The effort killed him. I watched his body simply come apart, torn into component pieces by forces he could no longer direct. His death disrupted what remained of the pattern, and the failed gestalt exploded outward, its mass expanding to fill the entire cave system. I ran, or what passed for running with my mismatched limbs. Other survivors fled as well, those few whose bodies had reformed enough to permit movement. The caves collapsed behind us, the unstable warp energy causing physical reality to rebel. to reject the intrusion of forces that had no place in material space. I emerged into daylight that my changed eyes could barely process, crawling on appendages I didn't recognize as my own. The colony was gone. The caves had been its heart, and with those destroyed, the remaining spawn scattered into the wasteland with no organization or purpose. I walked away from the ruins, driven by some instinct to move, to put distance between myself and the place where my last attempt at purposeful transformation had failed so catastrophically. Time lost all meaning. I wandered the wasteland, moving without destination or reason, my fragmented mind incapable of forming plans or goals. Days and nights passed in cycles I was only vaguely aware of. Temperature changes that affected my body, but not my consciousness. I became a creature of pure reaction, responding to immediate stimuli without thought or reflection. I killed when I encountered living things, not from hunger, but from impulse, some deeply embedded instruction that survivors must eliminate threats. Humans, animals, even other spawn when I encountered them in the wasteland. Each killing was mechanical, efficient, forgotten immediately after completion. I left trails of bodies behind me, evidence of my passage that attracted scavengers and eventually hunters. A new group found me, cultists who worshipped chaos, but had not yet undergone transformation themselves. They saw me as a sacred being, something to be revered and studied. They built a crude shrine around wherever I chose to rest, performed rituals in my presence, offered me sacrifices I ignored. I barely noticed their existence, these small humans who fluttered around me like insects around a corpse. They began trying to communicate with me, speaking words I could no longer understand, making gestures that held no meaning. One of them, braver or more foolish than the others, approached close enough to touch my body, running fingers over the various textures my flesh had developed. I tolerated this for several minutes before my instincts activated, and I tore him apart. The others didn't flee. They seemed to consider his death an honor. My body continued its transformation, but without direction or purpose. New limbs would sprout and then wither away. My head would split and then reform. My torso would develop orifices that opened onto nothing, that seemed to exist only because flesh had to do something with the energy constantly flowing through it. I was becoming random, a collection of biological possibilities explored without plan. The cultists began bringing others to see me, pilgrims who traveled from distant settlements to witness what they called a true blessing of chaos. I existed in a near catatonic state, responding to nothing except immediate threats. They would sit around me for hours, days, seeking revelations I couldn't provide because I no longer had coherent thoughts to share. Occasionally, moments of clarity would pierce through the fog. I would suddenly remember something, some fragment of my past, as Corvus Thane. The memory would be crystal clear for seconds, and then it would dissolve back into the chaos of my fragmented consciousness. These moments became less frequent over time, until entire months would pass without a single instance of genuine recall. The Imperial Guard finally located me through the pilgrims. They sent a kill team, specialists equipped for eliminating corrupted targets. The cultists tried to defend me, throwing themselves between the Guard and their sacred spawn. They died quickly and pointlessly. The guards advanced on my position, weapons ready, tactics precise. I killed most of them, not through skill or planning, but through simple physical superiority. My body had become a weapon optimized for violence, even if the mind directing that body had degraded to near nothing. I moved faster than they could track, hit harder than their armor could withstand, ignored wounds that would have killed any normal creature. The survivors retreated, calling for orbital support. The bombardment should have killed me. They dropped enough explosive force to level a city block. But I survived, buried under rubble, my body slowly regenerating damage that would have been instantly fatal to anything else. I dug myself out over the course of days, emerging into a crater where the cultist camp had been, where nothing now lived or grew. I walked away from the crater, my purpose unchanged, because I had no purpose. I was simply a thing that moved and killed and continued existing, despite all reasons suggesting I should have died. The transformation had made me nearly impossible to destroy, but it had also made existence meaningless, reduced me to a biological machine operating without goals or desires. I can't remember how long I wandered after the bombardment. Time had become irrelevant, just a succession of moments without connection or continuity. I existed in an eternal present, with no past to reflect on and no future to anticipate. Each moment was complete in itself, disconnected from what came before or after. Sometimes I would encounter other spawn, creatures like me who had lost themselves in transformation. We would circle each other warily, animal instincts assessing threat levels, usually choosing to disengage rather than fight. There was no kinship between us, no recognition of shared experience. We were solitary creatures by nature, our transformations having destroyed whatever social instincts we might have had. I found myself in a city, though I have no memory of entering it. The structures were abandoned, damaged by some conflict I hadn't witnessed. I wandered through empty streets, my body too large for most doorways, leaving trails of destruction as I forced my way through obstacles. In one building, I found a mirror, somehow intact among the surrounding debris. The thing reflected in that mirror was not remotely human. It was massive, asymmetrical, covered in features that served no salient purpose. Multiple arms of varying lengths, legs that bent in 3 places, a torso that seemed to contain too many internal organs, bulging in random locations, a head that was barely recognizable as such, more a collection of sensory organs than anything resembling a face. I stared at the reflection, trying to connect it to any memory of what I had been. The effort produced nothing. I had no baseline for comparison, no retained image of Corvus Thane to measure this against. The creature in the mirror was simply what I was now, neither better nor worse than what I had been, just different in ways I could no longer evaluate. My consciousness fragmented one final time. The various partitions I had created to manage pain and maintain function stopped communicating with each other entirely. I became not one creature with multiple thought processes, but multiple creatures inhabiting the same body, each aware of the others, but unable to coordinate. We would fight for control, different partitions trying to direct movement in different directions, leaving the body paralyzed by internal conflict. The screaming partition became dominant, its continuous expression of pain overwhelming everything else. For periods that might have been days or weeks, I was nothing but that scream, a single sustained note of agony that came from having consciousness at all, from being aware of existence without the cognitive tools to make sense of that existence. Other partitions emerged and vanished. A partition that believed it was still a loyal Imperial Guard sergeant, trying to organize patrols and maintain discipline. A partition that thought it was a demon, attempting to use powers it didn't actually possess. A partition that had no identity at all, just raw awareness without content or context. I encountered a witch, a human psyker who had avoided imperial persecution by hiding in the ruins. She saw me and didn't flee, which marked her as either brave or insane. She approached slowly, speaking in a calm voice, saying words I couldn't understand, but that somehow carried meaning beyond language. She was offering to help me, to ease my suffering. I couldn't respond. The partition currently controlling our body's minimal functions had no access to language, no way to accept or refuse her offer. She seemed to understand this, began performing some kind of ritual, drawing patterns in the air that glowed with psychic energy. The patterns resonated with something deep in my transformed flesh, creating a sensation I couldn't classify as pleasant or unpleasant. Her ritual failed catastrophically. Whatever she had been attempting required more power than she possessed, and when she pushed beyond her limits, something in her mind broke. I watched her body seize, her eyes rolling back, blood running from her nose and ears. She died quickly, her brain unable to sustain the forces she had tried to channel. I stood over her corpse, unable to feel anything about her death, unable to process the fact that she had been trying to help me. I'm writing this, though I don't know how. Some partition of my fragmented mind has retained literacy, can still form letters and words, even though I can no longer speak them. My hand, if that's what this appendage is, holds a crude stylus, scratches marks into a flat surface I found in the ruins. Whether these marks actually form readable text or are just random scratches, I cannot determine. The partition that writes doesn't communicate with the partition that observes. The pain never stops. I've learned to exist alongside it, but I haven't transcended it the way the presence promised I would. Every moment of consciousness includes pain as a fundamental component, like breathing or heartbeat for creatures that still perform those functions. The pain has no meaning, teaches nothing, serves no purpose. It simply is. I remember almost nothing of Corvus Thane now. Fragments occasionally surface, disconnected images without context. A woman's face, possibly someone I loved. A landscape of golden grain, possibly my homeworld. The smell of weapons oil, possibly from my days in the guard. These fragments are isolated islands in an ocean of blank confusion, with no bridges connecting them to anything else. The transformation continues, though I think it's slowing. Or perhaps time itself is changing for me, moments stretching longer or compressing shorter based on factors I can't identify. I grow new appendages and lose old ones. My mass increases and decreases. My consciousness fragments further and sometimes partially reunifies. There's no stability, no equilibrium, just endless change without direction. I think I'm dying, though death may not be the right word. Something in the process is unsustainable, some fundamental incompatibility between what I was and what I've become. My body holds together through warp energy more than physical cohesion, and that energy feels less stable with each passing moment. Eventually, the various forces will fail to balance, and I'll simply come apart. Or perhaps I'll stabilize in some new configuration, become something even stranger than I am now. Perhaps the transformation never ends, continues for centuries or millennia, producing forms that bear no relationship to anything that could be called alive. Perhaps that's what it means to be a chaos spawn, to exist in perpetual becoming without ever arriving at any final state. The presence that guided me initially is long gone. I haven't perceived it in any partition of my consciousness for longer than I can measure. Either it abandoned me when I became too degraded to serve its purposes, or my senses have changed so much that I can no longer detect it. Either way, I'm alone now. as alone as any creature can be while containing multiple fragmentary personalities. I see other spawn sometimes, in the distance, moving through the wasteland on their own incomprehensible journeys. We never approach each other. There's no communication possible between creatures who have lost language, lost the basic frameworks that allow minds to connect. We're singular beings in every sense, locked into private experiences that can never be shared or understood by others. The Imperial forces have stopped hunting me. Perhaps they've declared this sector lost, abandoned it to chaos. Perhaps they simply have larger threats to address. Or perhaps I've become so degraded that I no longer register as a priority target, just another corrupted creature in a wasteland full of them, not worth the resources required for elimination. I think about the choice I made, accepting the Presence's offer of transformation. I try to evaluate whether it was worth it, whether I gained anything that justified what I've become. The effort produces no clear answer. The question assumes a continuity of identity that may no longer exist, assumes that the thing asking the question has any meaningful connection to the sergeant who accepted the offer. My memory of accepting that offer is itself suspect now. Did it happen the way I remember? Or has my degraded mind constructed a false narrative to explain my current state? I have no way to verify my own memories, no external reference point to check them against. Everything I think I know about my past could be invention, stories I've told myself to maintain an illusion of continuous identity. The writing is becoming harder. The partition that controls this hand is losing coherence, its attention wandering to other concerns I can't identify. Soon, I'll lose the ability to form letters entirely, lose this last connection to human communication. When that happens, there will be nothing left of Corvus Thane except a body that carries no trace of what it once was. I wonder if other spawn retain any fragment of their original selves, or if I'm unique and clinging to these last shreds of humanity. I'll never know. We can't communicate, can't share our experiences, can't learn from each other's transformations. Each of us is alone in our degradation, following paths that diverge in infinite directions. The pain spikes suddenly, overwhelming all other sensations. Every partition of my consciousness experiences it simultaneously, creating a moment of unified awareness that's itself agonizing. This is what existence has become, brief interludes of fragmented consciousness, separated by waves of pain that temporarily force unity through shared suffering. When the pain recedes, I'm somewhere else again. No memory of moving, no sense of time passing, just a discontinuity in location that suggests hours or days have vanished from perception. The stylus is still in my hand, but the surface I was writing on is gone, lost somewhere in the gap between moments. I'm standing in front of another shrine, though I don't remember walking here. The symbols carved into rock call to me, promising things I can no longer understand, offering transformations I can no longer refuse or accept. The presence is here, I think, or something like it. Multiple presences, perhaps, each whispering different promises, each offering different paths forward. But I have no way to respond. The partition that could understand their offers no longer connects to the partitions that control action. I'm a passive observer of my own existence, watching as forces beyond my comprehension continue reshaping me according to patterns I'll never grasp. This is what remains of Corvus Thane. Not death, which would be a mercy. Not transcendence, which was the promise. Just existence without meaning, consciousness without coherence, life without purpose. I am becoming, endlessly becoming, never arriving at anything that could be called a destination. The transformation continues. I change. I endure. I forget what I was and cannot understand what I'm becoming. There is only this moment, and the next moment, and the moment after that, each separate and disconnected. An infinite sequence of isolated instants that add up to nothing. I believed chaos would grant me power. It granted me existence beyond human limitation. But existence isn't the same as life. I believed I would transcend humanity and discover new heights of consciousness. Instead, I've discovered that consciousness without coherence is worse than no consciousness at all. Thoughts fade. The partition writing this loses its grip on the stylus. The final words blur together as control slips away. What remains is no longer truly human, no longer truly anything. Just a collection of biological processes and warp energies sustaining themselves without goal or reason. This is the truth about chaos spawn. We are not tragic figures. We are not victims deserving sympathy. We are cautionary examples, living proof that some transformations should never be pursued, that some knowledge should remain hidden, that some prices are too high even for power beyond imagination. I am Corvus Thane. I am something else. I am still becoming, and there is no end in sight.